Berlin during the early years of the war lived to the rhythm of the military machine. In the ministries, footsteps echoed through marble corridors. Papers passed from hand to hand, and every desk was covered with reports from the front and official orders. Within this endless bureaucratic system worked a man who at first seemed no different from thousands of others. His name was Fritz Kolbe, a modest, mid-level diplomat without rank, influence, or ambition. Yet he would later become the man who handed the Allies documents that changed the course of the war. Fritz was born in 1900 in Swabia into an ordinary German family. After the First World War, he entered the service of the Foreign Ministry of the Weimar Republic. His career unfolded quietly. Disciplined, precise, and discreet, he earned the trust of his superiors. When the National Socialist regime rose to power, Kolbe refused to accept its ideology. He watched as the state apparatus turned into an instrument of fear and obedience. Within the ministry, it became dangerous even to voice doubt. Colleagues who once made light remarks about the new authorities vanished overnight. Kolbe was not a fighter in the traditional sense. He was a bureaucrat, a man of order, but it was precisely that sense of order that made him feel disgust toward the chaos the new regime brought. He saw how diplomacy was being transformed into a facade for aggression and conquest. In quiet offices, documents were being signed that would pave the way for war, all under the pretext of protecting Germany's interests. By 1941, Kolbe had obtained a position within the Central Department of the Foreign Ministry. He now had access to a vast flow of diplomatic correspondence reports from embassies and consulates around the world, data on relations with the Axis powers, and information about raw material supplies. He realized that diplomacy had turned into an instrument of deception. Germany was waging war against the world, and this effort was sustained through a carefully built system of misinformation. The defeat near Moscow and later setbacks deeply affected him. Kolbe understood that Germany was heading toward catastrophe, yet no one dared to speak of it. Even after the surrender at Stalingrad on the 2nd of February 1943, the bureaucratic routine continued as if nothing had happened. Papers circulated, signatures were placed, and orders were followed. He realized that the war machine survived only because thousands like him refused to resist. In the spring of 1943, he made a decision that would alter his life forever. He resolved to deliver documents to the Allies, not as an act of betrayal, but as an act of conscience. For him, loyalty to humanity outweighed loyalty to a regime. He understood that discovery meant certain death, yet the moral necessity was stronger than fear. Kolbe began discreetly collecting papers that could be of value. He didn't steal them, he memorized, copied, and concealed details with utmost care. Every page mattered. Intelligence on weapon production, reports on negotiations with Japan, information about secret raw material shipments. Piece by piece, he built a picture that only the Allies would later see. In July 1943, he received an assignment to travel to Switzerland under diplomatic cover. Officially, it was a courier mission to deliver ministry documents. Unofficially, it was his opportunity to act. Among the official dispatches in his briefcase, he concealed selected materials, hidden beneath routine papers. On the 12th of August 1943, Fritz Kolbe crossed the Swiss border. His diplomatic passport opened doors, but it did not guarantee safety. Any hint of suspicion could have meant arrest. Behind him lay Berlin, a city of watchful eyes and whispered denunciations. Ahead lay a country where, for the first time in years, he could tell the truth, even if only once, even if only in secret. He did not yet know that this journey would make him one of the most significant spies of the Second World War. During the war, Switzerland remained an island of relative stability amid a world in flames. Bern, its quiet capital, lived in the rhythm of cautious neutrality. There were fewer uniforms on the streets, but more watchful eyes. Every embassy, every cafe, every hotel lobby carried the faint pulse of espionage. It was here, in August 1943, that Fritz Kolbe arrived, a German diplomat who had decided to take a step that could be made only once in a lifetime. His official mission seemed routine. He was to deliver a packet of documents to the German embassy in Bern, exchange diplomatic papers, and return home. Yet within his briefcase lay a hidden cargo, carefully chosen materials that could expose the Reich's strategic secrets to the Allies. Kolbe knew that even a brief delay at the border could cost him his life. But fortune favored him. He passed the checkpoint without suspicion. His next task was to find someone he could trust with information that could not be spoken aloud. Bern was a crossroads of intelligence networks: British, American, Soviet, and German. Spies and diplomats mingled in the same rooms, all pretending to be neutral. Every meeting was watched, every deviation noted. Kolbe understood that even a casual contact with foreigners might attract the attention of the Reich's counterintelligence. His move had to be precise, deliberate, invisible. For the first few days, he waited. He watched, studied routines, and gathered courage. The pressure was enormous. If he failed to deliver the documents, he would have to take them back to Berlin, where discovery meant certain death. Through a neutral intermediary, disguised as a trade representative, Kolbe managed to send out a discreet message. He identified himself only as a German official opposed to the regime who wished to pass along important information. That brief note was enough to draw the attention of Allied intelligence operating in Switzerland. Within days, the message reached the American intelligence network in Bern, operating under diplomatic cover. Its head was Alan Dulles, the man who would later become the first director of the CIA. When Dulles received word of an unnamed German willing to cooperate, he was skeptical but intrigued. Genuine information from the heart of the Nazi bureaucracy was rare. Still, he decided to take the risk. The meeting took place in a neutral office used by American contacts. For Kolbe, it marked the point of no return. He entered quietly, carrying a portfolio filled with classified papers. The men waiting for him did not know who he truly was, and he did not know if he could trust them. But the decision was already made. That day, he handed over the first batch of documents, the beginning of one of the most remarkable intelligence operations of the Second World War. Inside those folders were detailed reports of Germany's diplomatic dealings with Spain, Portugal, Turkey, and Japan. They included data on raw material supplies, military production, and lists of German agents abroad. To Dulles's astonishment, the information was genuine, direct, and comprehensive. It was unlike anything the Allies had received before. Dulles assigned the source a code name, George Wood. Under that alias, hundreds of documents would later flow from Berlin to Bern and onward to Washington and London. Each delivery expanded the Allies' understanding of the Nazi state's inner workings. After the first meeting, Kolbe returned to his hotel and spent several sleepless nights. The weight of what he had done pressed on him like a stone. Discovery meant execution. Yet, for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose. In a world where most stayed silent, he had chosen to act. His weapon was not a gun, but truth recorded on paper. Beneath Bern's calm surface raged an invisible war, one fought through words, numbers, and stolen pages. And in that silent conflict, Fritz Kolbe had just become one of its most important soldiers. When the mission in Switzerland was over, Fritz Kolbe prepared for the journey back. Outwardly, he remained calm, but inside he felt the weight of what he had done. He was returning not as a simple courier of the foreign ministry, but as a man who now carried a secret that could destroy him. Every document he had handed over to the Americans was a trace that might one day lead back to him. The train moved slowly toward the German border. The Swiss mountains disappeared behind him, replaced by gray valleys and the sharp geometry of military checkpoints. Each kilometer brought him closer to the heart of the regime he had just betrayed. Border inspections were thorough, and the faces of German officers had changed. Their expressions were harder, their eyes suspicious. The entire country lived under surveillance. Any deviation from the norm could mean interrogation or worse. When Kolbe returned to Berlin at the end of August 1943, everything seemed the same. The ringing of telephones, the shuffle of papers, the mechanical rhythm of bureaucracy. But for him, the familiar noise now sounded different, as if each sound carried a warning. He went back to his desk, to his daily routine, and pretended that nothing had changed. He continued to work quietly, maintaining the image of an obedient civil servant. Yet, in secret, he watched, collected, and remembered. In the Foreign Ministry, the atmosphere grew darker by the week. Reports from the front were grim. After the bombings of Hamburg and the devastation in the Ruhr, few still believed in final victory. Fear had replaced conviction. Still, the machine functioned powered by orders, papers, and silence. Kolbe now lived a double life. He knew that the value of his position lay in access to information. Each day he handled classified cables, reports from embassies in Japan, Romania, and Hungary, summaries of industrial output, and records of secret negotiations. He memorized what he could, preparing for another chance to pass information to the Allies. By late 1943, internal control had tightened further. Party officers began appearing within the ministry to ensure ideological reliability. Random inspections were common. Files were checked. Even the most senior staff were questioned about their loyalties. Kolbe survived by being invisible, punctual, polite, and silent. He avoided small talk, never voiced an opinion, and never allowed emotion to betray him. At night, Berlin lay under a red sky. The distant hum of bombers became part of the city's heartbeat. Kolbe often stood by his window, listening to the sirens. He no longer saw the war as something distant. It was everywhere, in every building and street. But his resolve did not falter. He no longer acted out of hope, but out of duty. In December 1943, he began gathering a new selection of documents. He worked carefully, under the dim light of his apartment lamp, transcribing figures and dates. Outside, the winter was harsh and silent. Inside, he assembled evidence-fragile pages that could shift the balance of a global war. He knew that another trip to Switzerland might come soon. If it did, it could well be his last. One mistake, one suspicion, one missing page, and everything would end. Yet he continued, because to stop now would mean that all he had risked would be for nothing. Early 1944 found Germany exhausted and increasingly unstable. The defeats on the Eastern Front were undeniable, and the pressure from the West was intensifying. Inside government buildings, officials still tried to maintain the appearance of order, but beneath that surface lay anxiety and decay. The Foreign Ministry, once a place of polished protocol, had become an institution held together only by habit. In this climate, Fritz Kolbe prepared for another mission that could determine the course of his covert work. The assignment arrived in February. He was to deliver diplomatic correspondence to the German embassy in Bern. On paper, it was a routine courier task. In reality, it was the opportunity he had been waiting for. A chance to pass a new selection of documents to the Allies. Kolbe understood that the risks had grown. After several internal investigations in other departments, German counterintelligence had become more vigilant, especially regarding foreign trips. In the weeks before departure, Kolbe discreetly collected materials for his second delivery. He worked with greater caution than before. Among the papers he prepared were reports on industrial production, summaries of negotiations with neutral countries, and analyses of raw material routes that sustained the war machine. One packet contained intelligence about supplies routed through Spain and Turkey, information that could help the Allies understand the Reich's remaining lifelines. In early March 1944, Kolbe once again boarded a southbound train. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. A German diplomat with a sealed portfolio and the usual travel documents. Inside, however, he felt the same tension that had accompanied him during his first mission. The train moved through the cold German landscape, past bombed stations and fields marked by war. Every ruined building, every silent crowd he passed reminded him why he was doing this. At the border near Constance, inspections had become stricter. Soldiers examined passports, questioned travelers, and searched luggage with deliberate suspicion. But diplomatic mail was still protected by protocol. No one dared to open his portfolio. A few hours later, Kolbe crossed into Switzerland. The air seemed lighter, the atmosphere calmer. But he allowed himself only a moment of relief. His task had only begun. In Bern, he re-established contact with the American intelligence network. The meeting was conducted with utmost care. The documents he delivered expanded the Allies' understanding of the Reich's inner workings, details of industrial vulnerabilities, information on diplomatic maneuvering, and insights into the fragile alliances Germany was trying to preserve. Some of the reports he carried revealed early plans by certain German officials to prepare for defeat, a glimpse into the regime's growing desperation. Alan Dulles and his team quickly recognized the value of the new material. It confirmed the credibility of George Wood, the codename assigned to Kolbe. The source was not only reliable, but uniquely positioned. His information began shaping Allied assessments of Germany's remaining strength, influencing strategic decisions far beyond Bern. Kolbe left Switzerland quietly, knowing that each journey increased the danger. Crossing the border back into Germany, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He returned to Berlin without incident, stepped back into the rhythm of ministry life, and resumed the silent role that protected him. His mission continued unarmed, unseen, and driven by a clarity of purpose that few around him could imagine. The spring of 1944 brought a growing sense of fear to Berlin. Germany's defeats were no longer isolated events, but signs of inevitable collapse. Inside the foreign ministry, people spoke in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders before saying anything beyond official protocol. Outwardly, the work continued, the ringing of telephones, the stamping of papers, the rhythm of bureaucracy unchanged. Yet beneath that facade, the air was thick with anxiety. Fritz Kolbe moved through this environment with deliberate caution. Since his second mission to Switzerland, he had become more careful than ever. He sensed eyes watching him, perhaps real, perhaps imagined. A few colleagues had recently disappeared, officially reassigned, but in truth taken for interrogation. The Gestapo's presence inside the ministry was no longer subtle. Routine questioning, personnel audits, and background checks became constant. Kolbe's only defense was to remain invisible, to blend perfectly into the monotony of administrative life. At his desk, he continued collecting information. Reports from Hungary, Romania, and Italy passed through his hands allies that were beginning to doubt Berlin's leadership. He memorized details, storing them for a time when he could once again reach Switzerland. Each piece of intelligence carried the same silent purpose: to shorten the war and end the regime, destroying his country from within. By June, the Allies had landed in Normandy. The official bulletin celebrated Germany's determined resistance, but inside the ministry, everyone understood what it meant. The war was turning irreversibly against them. Kolbe watched the desperate optimism in his superior's eyes and saw in it not loyalty but denial. Diplomacy had become a ritual, a performance of stability in a collapsing world. Then, in July 1944, came the failed assassination attempt on Hitler. The event triggered a wave of terror inside Germany. Thousands were arrested, interrogated, and executed. The purge extended deep into the bureaucracy. Within the foreign ministry, suspicion turned into policy. Every employee was re-examined, every past connection questioned. Kolbe knew he was in danger. His previous trips abroad had already attracted quiet notice. In August, he was summoned to the personnel office for verification of loyalty. The interview was short but intense. He was asked about his contacts, his time in Switzerland, and his political views. His answers were calm and precise, loyal, factual, and devoid of emotion. Years of bureaucratic discipline served him well. When the questioning ended, he was released without further comment. But the experience left a trace of cold certainty. He was now on someone's list. From that moment, he acted with absolute restraint. He spoke little, avoided gatherings, and devoted himself entirely to work. The information he gathered now existed only in his memory. To write anything down would have been suicide. At night, he sat alone in his apartment, listening to the distant hum of bombers. The city trembled, the air filled with dust. He no longer believed in personal survival. His only hope was to complete what he had begun. Then, unexpectedly, in late September 1944, an order arrived. He was to deliver new documents to the German embassy in Bern. Whether by bureaucratic oversight or sheer chance, he had been selected again. For Kolbe, it was the opportunity and the danger he had been waiting for. He packed quickly, preparing what could be his final transmission. Among the official dispatches, he concealed documents revealing the regime's inner collapse plans for evacuation, records of industrial failures, and reports of officials already negotiating their own survival. These papers would confirm what the world suspected, that the Reich was crumbling from within. In October 1944, Fritz Kolbe left Berlin once more. The city he departed was unrecognizable, streets lined with rubble, civilians moving through the ruins without expression. The capital of the Reich was dying. As the train carried him south, he knew that he might never return. But for him, survival had long ceased to matter. Only the truth did. Autumn 1944 marked the beginning of the end for Germany. The Eastern Front was collapsing, Allied forces were approaching the Rhine, and within the country, chaos reigned. Ministries still operated, but only in appearance, their officials drowning in paperwork that no longer mattered. The Foreign Ministry, once a symbol of authority, was now a shadow of itself. Amid this disintegration, Fritz Kolbe prepared for what he knew might be his final mission. His new assignment came under strict secrecy. He was to deliver diplomatic mail concerning Germany's relations with neutral states, a routine courier duty. Bureaucracy persisted even as bombs fell. For Kolbe, it was another, and perhaps last, chance to deliver intelligence that could help end the war sooner. Hidden among the official envelopes were carefully selected documents, plans for the evacuation of state archives, reports on Germany's dealings with neutral banks, and summaries of the failing industrial base in the Ruhr region. Crossing the border that October was far more dangerous than before. German border guards were tense, their inspections slow and meticulous. The regime had become paranoid, suspecting treachery everywhere. But diplomatic mail still carried the weight of protocol. No one dared to open a courier's sealed case. Hours later, Kolbe stepped again onto Swiss soil. In Bern, he renewed contact with the American intelligence network. Alan Dulles understood that this visit might be the last. The documents Kolbe provided were of extraordinary value. They revealed secret negotiations between German industrialists and neutral financial institutions, technological research on radar and communication systems, and attempts by senior Nazi officials to secure future arrangements with the West. The material painted a picture of a regime already preparing for its own downfall. The Americans verified the authenticity of every paper. Their analysts confirmed that George Wood, Kolbe's code name, was not only reliable, but indispensable. His reports were now circulating through the highest levels of Allied command. Information from his dispatches influenced strategic bombing targets, counterintelligence operations, and diplomatic planning for post-war Europe. For a few days, Kolbe remained in Switzerland under protection. He could have stayed. Dulles reportedly hinted that it might be safer not to return, but Kolbe refused. His conscience demanded consistency. To disappear would cast suspicion on his actions, and that could endanger the credibility of everything he'd achieved. His mission was about truth, not escape. The journey back to Germany was silent and tense. The train moved slowly through landscapes marked by war-empty stations, burned villages, and shattered bridges. In early November 1944, he reached Berlin, now a city of ruins. Anti-aircraft guns stood on street corners, blackout curtains hung over broken windows. The people moved like shadows. Kolbe resumed his position at the ministry, as if nothing had happened. No accusations followed. His anonymity shielded him better than any disguise. Among thousands of clerks processing meaningless papers, no one imagined that this quiet man had provided the Allies with intelligence that shaped the war's final phase. Through the winter, he remained at his desk, continuing to observe, to remember, and to endure. His active mission was over, but his fight, the moral one, was complete. The rest would be decided not by him, but by the collapse of the empire he had silently helped to dismantle. The winter of 1945 was the final chapter of the Third Reich. Germany was collapsing from within. The Allied armies were closing in from the west. From the east, the Red Army advanced relentlessly toward the Oder. Berlin lived under constant air raids, sirens, searchlights, and the distant rumble of artillery had become part of the city's daily rhythm. The Reich, once so confident in its permanence, now existed only in ruins and paperwork. Fritz Kolbe continued to appear at his post each morning. His presence drew no attention. The chaos of the collapsing bureaucracy protected him better than secrecy ever could. Yet, even as he performed the mechanical routines of a dying ministry, he knew the end was near. He had done everything possible. The rest belonged to history. By February 1945, Berlin had turned into a city of rubble and shadows. Streets were filled with debris. Tram lines were broken. Electricity flickered on and off. People queued for water and bread while columns of refugees passed through the city heading west. The foreign ministry, partially destroyed by bombing, functioned only in fragments. Many officials had already fled. Others were burning documents that only weeks earlier they had guarded with their lives. Kolbe observed it all with quiet detachment. For years he had seen how the regime devoured itself through lies and fear. Now that decay was visible on every street corner. He understood that nothing he did now could alter the outcome, but he took a certain solace in knowing that his reports, long since in Allied hands, had already played their part. The information he had delivered had helped dismantle the networks and illusions sustaining the Nazi state. In March, as Allied forces crossed the Rhine, the atmosphere in Berlin turned desperate. Those still working in ministries were instructed to destroy archives, to erase the traces of their failures. In the foreign ministry's basement, bonfires of paper burned day and night. Entire histories vanished into smoke. Kolbe watched without expression. He knew that the true record of the regime's secrets already existed elsewhere in the files he had delivered across the Swiss border. When Soviet troops approached Berlin in April, the city fell into chaos. The ministry ceased to function. Offices were abandoned, files scattered across floors, typewriters left half-finished. Kolbe left the building for the last time, days before the fighting reached the city center. Around him, people fled, surrendered, or simply disappeared. He stayed, waiting in the ruins for the inevitable collapse. When Germany finally capitulated in May 1945, Kolbe was still alive. He had survived the regime he had defied. For the Allies, the name George Wood was already legendary, one of the most valuable sources in the war. For his own country, however, he remained unknown, even suspect. He wandered through the ruined streets of Berlin, watching a city that had once called itself eternal reduced to dust. The sound of hammers and shovels replaced the noise of bombs. A new world was beginning to rise from the ashes, though it carried the same human frailties as the old one. For Fritz Kolbe, the war was over, But the consequences of his actions were only beginning to unfold. He had given everything anonymity, safety, peace of mind to stand against a system of fear. And though no one around him knew it yet, history would remember him as the man who fought tyranny with nothing but truth and a handful of documents. The spring of 1945 brought an uneasy peace to a devastated Europe. Germany lay in ruins, its cities flattened, its institutions dismantled, its people displaced. Among the wreckage of the fallen Reich, one man lived quietly, known to the Allies only by his code name, George Wood. His real name was Fritz Kolbe. In the months following Germany's surrender, Allied investigators began sifting through the remnants of the Nazi bureaucracy. As they pieced together the structure of the regime, one name appeared repeatedly in the files of the American Office of Strategic Services. Alan Dulles, now in charge of post-war intelligence coordination, ensured that Kolbe's contribution was officially recognized within American records. For the Allies, he was not a traitor, but one of the most valuable human sources of the war. When American officers finally located Kolbe in Berlin, they found not a spy in hiding, but a weary civil servant living among the ruins. He had made no effort to escape or conceal himself. His role had ended the moment the war did. He declined offers to continue working for intelligence services or to take part in post-war investigations. Kolbe believed his duty was fulfilled. He had acted out of conscience, not ambition. Despite the respect he earned abroad, his situation in post-war Germany was difficult. The new German administration, still filled with people who had served under the old regime, viewed him with suspicion. Within the foreign ministry, now under Allied supervision, his name was quietly avoided. Many former colleagues branded him a traitor, unwilling to distinguish between betrayal of the Reich and resistance to tyranny. He was denied re-employment in government service. Kolbe took a modest job in the private sector, living a life of obscurity. He rarely spoke of his wartime actions. When asked, he would simply say that he had done what any decent person should have done. To those who listened, his words carried no bitterness, only fatigue, the calm of someone who had seen too much and sought no recognition. In the United States and Britain, historians and intelligence officers continued to study the documents he had delivered. His reports had influenced countless strategic decisions, from targeting industrial centers to dismantling German espionage networks in Europe and Latin America. Years later, analysts concluded that the information provided by George Wood had shortened the war and saved thousands of lives. Only decades later did Germany begin to acknowledge him. In the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds, as a new generation of scholars examined the moral complexities of resistance within Nazi Germany, Fritz Kolbe's name re-emerged. Gradually, the narrative shifted from traitor to patriot, from bureaucrat to conscience. By the early 2000s, the German Foreign Ministry officially honored him, recognizing his courage and moral clarity. Fritz Kolbe died in 1971, quietly, as he had lived. There were no ceremonies, no medals, no headlines. Yet history eventually gave him what his own time had denied, recognition that one man, armed only with integrity and information, had struck a decisive blow against one of the most powerful regimes in history. His story endures as a testament to the power of individual conscience. In an age when fear silenced millions, Fritz Kolbe chose to act not with violence, but with truth. And though few saw it at the time, that choice changed the course of the war, and with it, the moral map of the modern world.